What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are here with the conclusion of Ultimate Invasion, and I'm curious to see how you guys feel about the ending of this. Don't forget there is a one-shot that comes out. So what this does here is this picks up with Howard Stark and Doctor Doom. Because lest we forget, this is not the traditional Ultimate Universe, right? The Ultimate Universe has basically been destroyed since Secret Wars 2015, as far as this story is concerned. The maker wanted to recreate it, so he just chose some random universe out there and then effectively used what was called the Immortus machine, basically a time travel device, in order to jump through the past and then change things over this universe's history to make it more to his own liking. And so Howard Stark being alive, Tony Stark is still alive, and Doctor Doom is actually Reed Richards. He's not really Victor Von Doom. But the whole idea here is that Howard Stark kind of hates this reality. He doesn't really like the way that things turned out. He doesn't like the changes that the maker has created. And so while on the surface, he kind of puts off this perception that he's duly working on this Immortus machine, the reality is that both he and Doctor Doom, Reed, whatever, are actively working against the maker. And so that's why when he shows up here to the maker with this Immortus machine, this time travel device, that the maker kind of makes a statement: you've built it, the machine that will enable me to do all the things I've already done, a way to make this world into the wonder that it is. The response of Howard is, no, I simply copied it, made one of my own, a better version if I do say so myself. Because remember, there was some point in time where the maker was attacked. And in fact, it's not the initial attack that we saw, right? Like when all these basically clones of superheroes from the future showed up, that there was some kind of a conflict, and we'll see it in this comic, where literally half the maker's head was blown apart. So we effectively forgot everything, right? So that's why Howard Stark is here building this Immortus machine in the first place, because honestly, the maker doesn't remember the exact changes that he made, and he doesn't remember how to recreate the Immortus machine because it had effectively been sabotaged. And so kind of the back and forth here, while Howard is talking to the maker, the whole time that's going on, Doctor Doom is moving from one location to the next, and he's actually activating these devices that will essentially shut down the kind of shield around this city, right? This giant fortress that the maker operates in. And what's funny is the maker says, before we do anything, activating this Immortus machine or anything like that, we have to kill the guy from the future who's sending these cloned superheroes back and taking pot shots. Now, we know that person is Kang the Conqueror, right? We know that from the ending of the last video. The kicker here is the identity of Kang the Conqueror. And I want to see what you guys think about the identity of Kang as we get through this, because it's not Nathaniel Richards. It's not the guy who is traditionally Kang. So what's cool about this is that as they talk and as they have this conversation, Howard goes as far as to say, like, that guy in the future is a monster, you're a monster, and honestly, I'm tired of choosing between which monster is the most desirable, which one is the most acceptable. So basically, Doctor Doom activates the device, it shuts down the shield, and that's when Kang makes his move. Now, it's not as though the groups are working together. Don't forget, Kang is in the future, always watching the past, so he knew this was going to happen. And so this is just kind of the moment when the attack gets launched. Now, the reality here is, despite the fact that these are all cloned superheroes using DNA, by and large, they don't really matter here, right? They have no real relevance here outside of the fact that it's just kind of like a big war that's happening. Now, for a lot of you guys who are looking at this and it just doesn't really feel overly dramatic, it makes sense. Jonathan Hickman is the kind of writer where, like, he needs room to kind of stretch his wings, right? Jonathan Hickman works best if you give him like 4 years to write a comic book story. That's how you get Avengers and New Avengers, right? You just get this phenomenal comic book run. For this, it's 4 issues long. He had 4 months to basically reboot the Marvel Universe, and then we have the Ultimate Universe one-shot that comes out. There's not a whole lot he can do to really build the characters up. And unless you're overly familiar with the Ultimate Universe, a lot of it's lost on you. But it is still important because this is, in effect, the reboot of the Ultimate Universe. So while all these characters are here, the maker sends out his own forces, the Children of Tomorrow. Now, for those of you guys who aren't really familiar with the Children of Tomorrow, if you're following our coverage of The Fall of X, and we've talked about the Children of the Vault, it's effectively the exact same concept. The difference here is that the Children of Tomorrow were created by Reed Richards and the Children of the Vault were not. That's just kind of the big difference between these two groups. But functionally, they're the same, right? Abilities and technological advancements and so on and so forth. But while this whole fight's going on, Howard Stark starts developing a kind of plan in his own mind to essentially take out both the Maker and Kang in one fell swoop. And so what you do is you jump to this fight between Kang and the Maker. Now, the funny thing about this is that in this battle between the two, Kang gives us very little information on what his identity is. All he really says is, I've waited 2 lives for this moment, and now the moment is here. But if you look on the chest of Kang the Conqueror, you'll see the exact same kind of time travel device that was presented to the Maker. So that right there is a kind of clue as to what his identity is. Now, for everybody else, right, for Howard, as he's trying to make his move, right, literally stealing the time travel device, he's ultimately hit by one of the forces of Kang and kind of thrown into this little bit of a conflict. And what we're told is the power conduit Terminator surge is in 1 minute, right, armed and activated, and it starts counting down. So effectively, at the end of this 1 minute, everything goes sideways, and the presumption is that everything ends. Now, as for the identity of Kang the Conqueror, what ends up happening is in this fight, there's this point where the Maker's helmet is smashed, right? And that's when we see like half of his head's blown off, although we already knew that. And he talks about how pain clarifies, and then he remembers who Kang the Conqueror is. That's when we basically jump to the far future, where at some point after the Maker had made these changes to the universe, he had traveled as far into the future as he possibly could, because what he wanted to know is whether or not his changes to the time stream were stable, whether or not the changes to the time stream that he made would actually stand the test of time, or if he needed to go back and make changes, right? Say, for example, there was something that he didn't account for, something he missed, and the changes that he was hoping would stay permanent ended up only ever being temporary. The issue is that when he gets here and he comes into contact with Kang the Conqueror, all Kang tells him is he says, you are here now as you were always going to be. You are the Maker, and I've been waiting for you. You are my Maker. And then in turn, he says, and now you witness my origin. And he attacks Reed and blows off half his head. And so that's where Reed says, like, I remember, I know who you are. And before we actually find out the identity of Kang, Howard shows up and says, so do I. And literally with this kind of time travel device on his chest, he basically activates it and then lets off this massive amount of energy, which to a degree kind of seems to send time into disarray. We don't know the exact effect it has. All we see is just like this massive explosion, but it's not as though people are just kind of like dissipating, disappearing, right, evaporating. It's not like they just suddenly vanish into thin air and it's just him by himself, right, where like there's this big explosion and then it shows the same image, but there's nothing, right? We don't really know exactly what this effect is. All we know is just a massive blast of energy. And so what you do is you switch over to Latveria, which was the Maker's castle, but now we can largely assume will become the headquarters of Dr. Doom. And when it comes to this kind of device, right, this actual tried and true Immortus engine, basically the one that was real as opposed to the fake one that was being carried around by Howard Stark and being presented to Reed as the actual Immortus engine, even though it wasn't, Dr. Doom locks it away in a kind of vault, right? He keeps it hidden away from seemingly everything. Dr. Doom ends up taking it for himself. So that's kind of the interesting thing here, right? The entire Immortus engine as it was presented to Reed was never real. It was seemingly just a great big huge ruse, because the hope here was that by taking down the shield and allowing Kang and his forces to enter into the city, it would give Howard the ability to destroy them all at one time. It's a genius move. It's an incredibly intelligent move. And so what you do is you pick up with these final seconds, right? 14, 13, 12, Howard Stark basically wakes up, right? And he gets out of his suit. He goes over to Kang the Conqueror. He takes off his mask, and then he just kind of holds his head in shame. So there are only really 2 possibilities here when it comes to Kang the Conqueror. The hope that I had is that it would turn out to be Susan Storm, because in the Ultimate Universe, Susan Storm, the wife of Reed, she becomes Kang. It was one of the coolest revelations from the Ultimate Universe, right? At least one of the few cool revelations from Ultimate Fantastic Four before Jonathan Hickman took over. But it was awesome, right? It was a really, really cool moment. It's obviously not her. My thought is that it's Howard Stark. It's the person Howard Stark becomes. He becomes Kang the Conqueror, right? He becomes the very monster that he doesn't want to be. On the other hand, there are fan theories, at least early theories so far, that it's actually Tony Stark, that Tony Stark becomes Kang the Conqueror. I want to know what you all think. right? Which one do you think it is? And so in the aftermath of this clock counting down, we end up picking up 1 week later, and we find out what the countdown actually meant. And we pick up with this universe's version of the Illuminati, right? The ones that we were introduced to before. We'll explain them a little bit here in a second for those of you guys who kind of forgot. But the idea behind this is that like the entire city is shut down. The whole thing is shut down and nobody's getting in. And it's gonna be that way for 2 years. Now, one of the things to remember about the nature of the city is that time passes differently. For every 1 month in the real world, 1,000 years pass inside the city. So we have no clue what's going on in there. Nobody does. No one has any idea. Reed Richards, Howard Stark, Kang the Conqueror, they're not dead, or at least presumably they're not dead, but all three are trapped inside that place. So once this 2-year window ends and the city opens back up, what in the world's gonna come out of it, right? Are they gonna decide to work together? Are they going to have killed each other off? Will everybody have been killed except for like one guy, Howard or Kang or the Maker? We don't have the answer to the question. And so because the Illuminati is now leaderless, the question they have is, what do we do? Now, for those of you guys who don't really remember the Illuminati, and again, as we do with all our videos, at the end of this, we'll have a playlist for you to click on so you can get caught up on Ultimate Invasion. The idea behind the Illuminati is that they were kind of a ruse created by the Maker, that in looking at society, the Maker realized that humanity can't function adequately unless it has some kind of a common enemy, right? It's like the same idea as the Matrix, right? Like that, Keanu Reeves and all that kind of stuff. When the Matrix was originally made, first it was a utopia, and then it became just this place of horrors, and then the machine empire realized humanity just has to have some measure of violence, death, and destruction in its life in order to believe that the life it's living is real. It's the exact same thing here. But when it came to the Illuminati, they were all working together. That one kingdom would be, quote unquote, the bad guy for a period of time. And all the other kingdoms would team up against the bad guy. And then after that bad guy was defeated, another kingdom would rise up and become the bad guy. And it was always a way to divert humanity's attention and to say, that guy over there is the villain. Because humanity cannot function with a utopia. It's just not in the nature of people at that point in time. And so all of them working behind the scenes, it's kind of like, well, I mean, what do we do? Like, how do we make this work? And their response is, we basically just split up the entirety of North America, right? We split the whole thing up and we all just rule it. Right? We literally just take over the entirety of the world and rule it as we always did. It's very Old Man Logan-esque, right? For those of you guys who remember that story, after all the superheroes on Earth were killed in Old Man Logan, that basically the villains took over different parts of the world. The Incredible Hulk ran one section, and what was it? The Kingpin or Doctor Doom, I think it was, ran like another section. The Red Skull ran what was basically New York, right? Like all the world was divvied up. That's kind of what's happening here. And so following that, you basically pick up with Tony Stark himself meeting with Doctor Doom. And it's a really cool thing because the exchange is amazing. What ended up happening is Howard had written a letter to Tony and he asked Doom, like, my father gave this to you. And the response of Doom is, the world was ending, Anthony, the future colliding with the now. Temporal kings were being overthrown and multiversal evils were being undone. But bringing these things to you was my most important task. And so Tony responds in asking, or at least in saying, the machine, the broken Immortus engine, which you and I have already repaired, the secret files you showed me, and this, a letter from my father. The response of Doom is, while I have some notion of what could be done with these things, the potential of them, he said, you would know what should be done. And so the choice is yours. And so Tony Stark kind of sits on it and he asks him, is my father dead? And the only real response he gets from Doom is variables, probabilities, the very character of the man fighting for his life. I'm sorry, but I have no way to definitively answer that question. And so as Tony Stark sits on this for a second, his response is, I'm gonna need a suit. And so what he starts doing is basically building off the Iron Man suit as it was created by Howard Stark and starts making adjustments to it. It'll need to handle temporal shear and need some kind of integrated navigational control and a weapon. It should also be a weapon. And so that's when he ends up building Repulsor Ring. Now this is where things get really, really cool. And this is why I say that I think it's potentially possible that Tony Stark became Kang. Because when he finishes the suit and he's asked by Doctor Doom, are you going to call yourself Iron Man after your father? The response of Tony is no, right? My father was Iron Man, I'm Iron Lad. Now, why does that matter? Because Iron Lad was the result, in the main Marvel universe, Iron Lad was the result of what happened when Kang the Conqueror went to his younger self and tried to force his younger self to make all the decisions that would need to be made in order to ensure he became Kang. The result was that his younger self rebelled and chose to become a superhero instead, calling himself Iron Lad. So in effect, in the main Marvel universe, Iron Lad is a teenage Kang the Conqueror before he becomes a villain. So that's why I say that may be what's going on here, right? Tony Stark will eventually become Kang. But for the final part of this, and this is one of the reasons why I love this so much, it's one of the coolest things, right? Remember, one of the things that Reed did is he went back, he changed things, prevented things from happening. For example, Thor was basically removed as the king, or at least prevented from being the king of Asgard. Loki took his place, different things along those lines. The letter that was written to Tony goes exactly like this, right? Howard says, "My dearest Anthony, I am so tired of this world. I am so tired of the people in it, of what they accept, and of what they have become. But I know the fault was mine, maybe more than most, because of my gifts and the means that came with them. I was so wrapped up in the good things I was doing, the work and the beauty that work provided us, that I didn't care enough to notice what was really going on in the world that I was shaping. I know now that it is a false, fallen world that we paint as quote unquote good enough, but under its skin, we all know it is rotten to the core. And on this reflection, almost all of the things that I have made do nothing but support the systems that reduce men and women to pawns and playthings, to workers and consumers, to servants and slaves. All the things I have made are tainted with a patina of evil." And he says, all of them but one. And that is you. If this has found its way to you, then I am gone, and I have left you a world that is no place for the innocent, but only innocent eyes can see it for what it could be. Remember, Anthony, it's never too late to change the world around you. And so what's going on here is that Tony Stark and Dr. Doom had traveled to the past using the Immortus engine before Reed Richards had initially shown up in this universe and started changing everything. They're hunting for someone, the one person that no matter what universe you're in is always the guy who knows how to lead the charge, is always the guy that can do the right thing, that almost has this incorruptible morality, that when the chips are down, when it seems like everything's falling apart, he's the guy that knows how to rally everyone. Tony Stark and Dr. Doom are finding the ultimate Captain America. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. I'm excited to see what comes out of this, man. Ultimate Steve Rogers is back, baby. And this guy, for those of you guys who never read the Ultimate Universe, he's dope. He's a dick, but he is awesome. I love Captain America in the Ultimate Universe. The Ultimates are coming back, baby. But if you guys need to get caught up, make sure you click the link to the playlist, and I will catch you all later. Peace.